Okay, so I want you to picture something. A massive global industry.
Like big tech or something?
Exactly like big tech, or maybe the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, we are talking billions of dollars moving through the pipes every single year.
Right.
It has its own celebrity CEOs, its own best-selling authors, high-paid consultants, even blockbuster movies.
When you put it like that, it sounds like we're about to discuss the next big IPO on Wall Street.
You would think so, but the product of this industry is the critique of racism. It is built entirely on the premise of dismantling white supremacy, the anti-racism industrial complex. But we found this startling paradox, a really uncomfortable economic reality right at the center of it all.
It's the classic follow the money problem, isn't it?
Exactly. The source material argues that the financial rewards of this industry, the cold, hard cash generated from discussing Black oppression, are almost exclusively funneled back into white bank accounts.
Into white neighborhoods.
Yeah, it's a boom economy, but, only for a specific demographic.
And that forces a very direct question right off the bat. Is the current model of anti-racism actually dismantling power structures? Or is it just commodifying Black oppression for white profit?
That is the heavy lift we are doing today. We are doing a deep dive into a report titled Critiquing White Anti-Racism Careers. We're looking at the political economy of the anti-racism industry.
We aren't looking at the feelings of racism today. We're looking at the business of it, who gets paid, how much, and what are they actually selling.
And when you hear the specific numbers, especially about some very famous authors you probably have on your bookshelf, it is going to blow your mind.
It is a fascinating, if, a bit cynical, look at how white educators have built these huge careers explaining racism to other white people and whether any of that actually helps foundational Black Americans or FBAs.
So let's start with the scale of this thing. Because I think people assume it's all grassroots work, folding chairs in a church basement.
And that's the big misconception. The source makes it clear this isn't a few local workshops. This is a boom. It's corporate consulting, it's global publishing, media production. It's an economy that scales.
And the source uses a massive case study to illustrate this. Robin DiAngelo,
the author of White Fragility.
Now, regardless of what you think of the book itself, love it or hate it, the economic footprint of that single text is just undeniable. The source notes that White Fragility spent 155 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list.
Let's just pause on that number for a second. That is nearly 3 years. And if you remember, during the summer of 2020, it was everywhere. It often sat at number 1. It became the default manual for corporate America. You've worked in an office back then. You saw this book on a desk.
The report estimates her royalties from book sales alone at over $2 million. But the source argues that the book is just the top of the funnel. It's the marketing brochure. The real money is on the speaking circuit.
And this is where that political economy part really kicks in. Because the fees have become standardized at a very, very high level. It's not an honorarium anymore. It's a corporate fee.
Okay, so listen to these numbers from the source. Her typical keynote fee is listed at $30,000.
$30,000.
For a workshop, it's between $35,000 and $40,000. The source estimates her annual revenue just from events is over $1.5 million.
Jeez.
But there was one specific detail in the contract breakdown that just made me stop reading. I literally had to put the paper down.
I think I know which one you're going to mention. The University of Kentucky contract?
Yes.
Okay.
So the University of Kentucky paid $12,000 for an appearance, which is already a lot of money for a couple of hours.
Sure.
But the contract included a phone call clause. It was a $5 per minute fee for phone calls related to planning.
$5 a minute.
To talk on the phone. I mean, I don't think high-end corporate lawyers even charge that specific breakdown.
It is meticulous. But what's fascinating here isn't just the greed. It's the barrier it creates. But the critique in the source goes deeper than just she makes a lot of money. It's laser focused on where that money goes.
Right. And this brings us to the concept of wealth recycling. This was a huge aha moment for me in the text.
Yeah, wealth recycling. So the argument is that this capital is generated by discussing the pain and oppression of Black people. But where does it land? The source points out DiAngelo's estimated housing wealth is around $1.6 million, with properties in predominantly white areas of Seattle and rural Washington.
So let's trace the dollar. You have a white speaker. paid by a white-led corporation speaking to a largely white audience, and then taking that money and investing it in white real estate markets.
So effectively, the industry of anti-racism is widening the racial wealth gap. The wages of anti-racism are being used to bolster white intergenerational wealth. It's a closed loop.
A totally closed loop. The money never actually touches the community that is the subject of the whole discussion.
And it's not just DiAngelo. The source brings up Tim Wise, who is another titan in this field. He commands fees between $10,000 and $20,000. The report calls this a standardized, lucrative profession.
So the core critique is that the stated goal of the work is ending hierarchy.
Right.
But the economic reality is the maintenance of white status. It's the professionalization of the problem. You can build an entire career on the problem without ever having to solve it.
But I can hear a listener thinking, okay, sure, they get paid a lot, but isn't talking about racism better than not talking about it? These companies are trying to do better right now. Why is the source so critical of the attempt?
That's the logical next question. But the source argues this is a discursive trap.
The discursive trap, let's break that down. It's the difference between awareness and structure. So much of this expensive advice, especially the white fragility model, focuses entirely on psychology. It's about feelings. You hear these terms like implicit bias, white fragility, or unconscious bias.
It treats racism like an individual ideological error. Like, oh, I have a bad thought, I need to work on my feelings, I need to be a better person.
Exactly. And that feels actionable to people. It feels like self-improvement. It's palatable. But the source argues that focusing on individual psychological awareness actively displaces the need for direct economic compensation.
Okay.
It creates what the report calls the white reprieve.
That sounds like a heavy concept. What is a white reprieve?
Think of a reprieve as a delay, a postponement of a sentence. In this context, it's a postponement of accountability. Think about a major corporation. The source mentions Amazon or Coca-Cola. They pay these fat stacks to speakers. Why?
To signal virtue, to say, look, we're doing the work, we hired the expert.
Right. But does paying a speaker $40,000 result in redistributing corporate wealth to FBAs?
Probably not.
Does it dismantle discriminatory hiring structures? Usually, no. It's a transaction that buys comfort. It allows the institution to say they've addressed the problem without actually changing the flow of capital.
So the psychology talk is kind of a shield.
It's a deflection. The source used a specific term for this mindset, disconscious racism.
Disconscious racism. I hadn't heard that one before.
It's important to distinguish it. It's not unconscious. It's disconscious. It's an uncritical habit of mind that justifies inequity even while professing a desire for change.
So you accept the status quo while claiming to be against it?
Exactly. The industry prioritizes shifting the narrative, changing how we talk over structural abolition, which would mean changing who owns what.
It's infinitely easier to change words than to change bank balances.
Precisely. And speaking of bank balances, the source takes a very hard look at some of the heroes of this movement. We mentioned Tim Wise earlier.
Yeah, the source acknowledges that Tim Wise knows his history. He isn't ignorant. He talks about FHA loans, VA loans, all the mechanisms that built the white middle class while locking black people out. He knows the math better than anyone.
He does. But the critique is that while he acknowledges the history of theft, he rarely makes federal reparations the non-negotiable pillar of his advocacy.
He diagnoses the illness but won't prescribe the only medicine that fixes it.
That's the argument. But the part that I think will surprise a lot of our listeners was the deep dive into Jane Elliott.
Jane Elliott is an institution.
She is.
I mean, for those who don't know, she's the creator of the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment. She's legendary for being the tough teacher who gives white people a visceral experience of what discrimination feels like. But the source calls out a massive contradiction here, a twist.
It turns out, despite her incredibly aggressive stance against prejudice, Jane Elliott has stated in interviews that reparations for FBAs are, quote, not a good idea.
What?
Or that they shouldn't be prioritized.
That seems wild for someone who has spent her entire life teaching about discrimination against black people. How does she justify that?
Well, the source provides this data table that really lays bare the double standard. It shows that Elliott highlights the Holocaust, where reparations were supported by Germany.
Okay.
She highlights Japanese-American internment, where reparations were enacted by the Civil Liberties Act of 1988.
So she uses those as examples of valid justice.
She champions those narratives as what happens when we get it right. But when it comes to foundational black Americans, she positions reparations as secondary or unwise. She has even argued that Native American reparations must happen before any consideration for Black Americans.
Which feels like, why do we have to choose? Why is it a competition?
That's the point. The source argues she is reinforcing a hierarchy of justice. By placing FBA economic needs at the back of the line, she maintains her icon status with white audiences because she isn't actually asking them to pay the specific debt owed to the descendants of the enslaved.
It's like, I'll make you feel bad, I'll yell at you in a workshop, but I won't make you pay.
And in a way, that feeling of badness, that guilt, is the product being sold. If she actually demanded the check, the marketability might just vanish.
This leads us to another really interesting concept in the report that sort of explains why this happens. It's called crowbarring.
This is such a powerful metaphor, and it explains how political agendas actually move.
So crowbarring is described as using the moral weight of the FBA struggle, the history of slavery, Jim Crow, the undeniable wrongness of it, to force open doors for other agendas.
Right. Think of the history of Black suffering as the heavy tool, the crowbar that cracks open the door of the establishment. The door was locked, but the moral force of that history breaks it open. But then the question is, once the door is open, who walks through?
And the source argues it's often LGBT rights groups, white women's rights groups, or general minority issues.
It's pointing out the asymmetry. The source observes that this only goes one way. FBA-specific demands like cash payments for descendants of slavery are rarely crowbarred into the core agendas of feminist or LGBT organizations.
Right.
You don't see a major pride march making FBA reparations a non-negotiable plank of their platform.
But you do see the anti-racism industry grouping everyone together constantly.
Exactly. This is what they call the dilution of the debt. When you group everyone as people of color or minorities, it allows power structures to just distribute resources broadly across a diversity spectrum.
So a corporation can hire a white woman or a recent immigrant from another country and say, look, we're diverse, we solved it.
While the specific debt owed to FBAs for chattel slavery and redlining remains completely unpaid, it diffuses the specific claim into a general multiculturalism that is much cheaper for the power structure to handle. It's cost-effective.
Man. Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem. We've got a multi-billion-dollar industry that recycles wealth to white speakers, focuses on feelings over finance, and dilutes the specific claims of Black Americans. It sounds bleak.
It does.
But the source doesn't just complain, it actually offers a brave path forward.
And this is where it gets really interesting because it moves away from books and movies entirely. The source suggests that if you really want to help, you stop being an audience member.
The source calls for strategic intelligence, or, to put it more bluntly, sabotage.
Yes. The argument is that if you are a white person who truly wants to help, you shouldn't be writing a book about your feelings. You should be using your insider status.
It says white insiders, doctors, lawyers, mechanics need to feed intel to the FBA community about hidden racism.
Think about it. So much racism happens behind closed doors, in ways that are hard to prove. The source gives the example of the medical field. White doctors know which of their colleagues have discriminatory peer reviews or just dismiss Black pain.
That's a real thing. We've seen the stats on pain management disparity.
Exactly. So the brave path is for that white doctor to tell the FBA community, do not go to Dr. Smith. He is dangerous to you. Or this hospital has a policy that negatively affects you.
Or the mechanic example. I loved this one because it's so practical. If you're a white mechanic and you see a colleague overcharging Black customers or, God forbid, doing unsafe work on their cars, you don't just write a poem about it. You tell the community, don't go to that guy.
It requires an active betrayal of the white code of silence. And the source emphasizes that this is far more risky.
Way more risky.
And therefore more valuable than writing a bestseller. It's actual operational support. It protects people's lives and their wallets.
And speaking of wallets, it's also about what you do with your own money. The source highlights a case study that I found really moving, Sarah Eisner and Randy Quarterman.
This is the blueprint the source wants us to see. It's the antithesis of the Robin DiAngelo model.
So Sarah Eisner discovered that her family had actually enslaved Randy Quarterman's ancestors. Now, the typical anti-racist move might be to write a memoir about the guilt of that discovery.
Right. Go on a book tour, cry on a talk show, center her own emotional journey, make it about her redemption.
But she didn't do that. She co-founded the Reparations Project. And she didn't just apologize, she took action. The source lists the outcomes. She helped save Quarterman's land from eminent domain in Georgia.
Which is huge, considering the history of Black land loss in the South. That is generational wealth preservation right there.
She funded over 30 scholarships. And maybe most importantly, she returned family documents and maps that helped the family prove their lineage.
She moved through white shame to white capital. That is the key phrase from the source. She didn't get stuck in the feeling. She used the resources she had, which were accumulated through historical harm, to repair that harm.
It's a redistribution of wealth, not a seminar on wealth.
Exactly. And that brings us to the ethical conflict that underpins this whole deep dive.
It's the uncomfortable truth about the industry itself.
The source argues there is a fundamental conflict of interest. If racism were truly abolished, the market for anti-racist speaking fees would collapse.
Right.
If the problem is solved, the experts are out of a job.
So the industry has a structural incentive to maintain the conversation rather than actually solve the problem.
They need the problem to exist to sell the solution. It's a perpetual motion machine of discourse.
And the source ends with a really stinging thought about those fees.
It calls the high fees paid to white speakers a tax on black pain.
Wow.
When a university or a corporation pays $30,000 for a keynote speech to a white author, that is $30,000 that is not going to FBA redress. It's money extracted from the topic of black suffering, paid to a white individual.
That's a sobering way to look at it. Instead of investing in the community being harmed, you're investing in the person describing the harm.
It really is. It challenges the listener. If you are engaging in this work, where's the money going?
So the source leaves us with a call to reflection. The brave path isn't about reading another book. It's about refusing speaking fees or donating them 100%. It's about demanding FBA-specific policy like the Breathe Act mentioned in the text. And it's about personal wealth investigation.
It's about moving from being an observer of racism to being an active dismantler of the economic structures that sustain it. And that is much, much harder work than buying a ticket to a lecture.
It's heavy, but it's a perspective shift that I think is necessary. It really makes you rethink what help actually looks like.
Absolutely. Help isn't a feeling. Help is a resource.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. It was a challenging text, but those are usually the ones worth reading. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you.